Hello, my name is Harold Lepidus, and welcome to the Boston Herald podcast. On today's episode, I will be recreating the speech I gave during the four-day 2019 World of Bob Dylan Symposium in Tulsa, Oklahoma, almost exactly 1 year ago. It's been slightly altered and updated, but in essence, it contains the same content. This photograph you see here was taken by Matthew Martin during my presentation. I met Matthew at the airport, the first Dylan fan I encountered in Tulsa while awaiting the hotel shuttle, and I want to thank him for capturing this moment. I gave my talk at the end of the second day at the Gilchrist Auditorium. There were 4 concurrent panels all day long, and each speech was limited to 20 minutes. My presentation, Bob Dylan, Street Legal, and the Ghost of Elvis, was my chance to dig deep into one of my personal favorite periods in Dylan's career. My Street Legal talk was written with a live audience in mind, and some of what you're about to hear may lose something in the transmission. So picture yourself in an auditorium, pre-social distancing, surrounded by about 100 Dylan fans, and enjoy. Just like in Tulsa, I'll be looking down at my notes a lot, like I'm doing right now. But since I'll just be a tiny image in the upper right corner here, you'll barely be able to notice, I hope. Due to the constraints of the presentation, something about my thoughts on Presley did not make the final cut. Now we'll adjust this at the end. Before I began my presentation, I introduced myself, and I assume you already know who I am. And I thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to speak. Okay, here we go. Bob Dylan, Street Legal, and the Ghost of Elvis. That would be Elvis Presley. While I was still a teenager living at home on Long Island, it was my responsibility to mow the lawn. As I was doing this on the afternoon of August 16th, 1977, I was thinking back to the previous summer when I bought a copy of a National Lampoon magazine with a caricature of a bloated Elvis Presley on the cover, and wondering to myself how the king of rock and roll could let that happen. When I took a break from my mowing duties to get a cold drink, I quickly went up to my room and turned on WNEW-FM for a second, the same way we now check our phones for messages. This is how I learned Elvis had died. It was kind of sad, but let's face it, when Presley died, he'd become kind of pathetic. He was like a joke, and worst of all, he became irrelevant. But even I knew of his impact. It's kind of ironic that I'm giving a speech about Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan this afternoon. In 1969, I moved beyond the Beatles and the Monkees, and my ear was glued to 77 WABC AM on my transistor radio. With my $1 a week allowance, I'd buy 45s and LPs whenever possible. I loved everything from Johnny Cash to Sly and the Family Stone to the Cowsills, but there were 2 iconic artists I just did not get. One was Presley with his maudlin comeback sort of protest single, In the Ghetto. And the other was country Bob Dylan with his hit song, Lay Lady Lay. I just thought, this is what happens when you get old. You mellow out, you become boring. But Presley was 34 at the time, while Dylan was turning the ripe old age of 28. Fortunately, I had a friend named Danny Horowitz, who went on to become a lawyer and defended, among other people, David Letterman and Bernie Madoff. He was already a convert and convinced his parents to buy me a copy of the brand new Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits Volume 2, a double album, for my birthday in 1971, which was quite an investment at the time. A couple of years later, the sister of another of Danny's friends had an extra ticket for Bob Dylan and the band at the Nassau Coliseum on January 29, 1974, and Danny secured it for me. That concert changed my perception of art. That concert changed my perception of life. Now I was hooked. Over the next few years, I became obsessed with Dylan, buying and listening and learning all I could about this charismatic yet enigmatic guy. When tickets went on sale for the Rolling Thunder Revue at Madison Square Garden on my birthday in 1975, my parents allowed me to skip school 1 week earlier to take the Long Island Railroad to Penn Station to get tickets at the box office, the only available outlet. It was a great time to be a fan. There's Blood on the Tracks, the Basement Tapes, the John Hammond Tribute, Desire, Rolling Thunder. And then, almost on schedule, Dylan appeared to throw it all away. There was Hard Rain, an intense but alienating primetime TV special, and Ronaldo and Clara, a misunderstood, self-financed 4-hour masterpiece. Both were savaged by the critics. Brilliant, bold, artistic statements, yes, but not for the meek or faint-hearted. Add to the mix a divorce and the death of Elvis, and you get the context of how Street Legal was conceived. While on tour in 1978, Dylan told critic and early supporter Robert Shelton about his reaction to Presley's death. "I broke down," he said, "one of the very few times. I went over my whole life. I went over my whole childhood. I didn't talk to anyone for a week after Elvis died. If it wasn't for Elvis and Hank Williams, I wouldn't be doing what I do today." And footnote, I guess we can now add Little Richard, among others, to that list. Presley was an obvious influence on Dylan and an entire generation. There's no doubt Dylan could relate to Presley's meteoric rise, melding of musical styles, exploitative manager, public divorce, and occasional gospel and Christmas albums. And they each identified as a twin, in a way. Dylan also recorded outtake versions of Presley's first single, "That's All Right Mama," at sessions in 1962, 1964, and again in 1969, this time with Sun Records alumni Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins. And "That's All Right Mama" was apparently the inspiration for Dylan's 1964 song, "It's All Right Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." When he was asked about this by Robert Shelton, Dylan replied, "Yeah, they are sort of the same song." Sort of. So anyway, when Dylan signed with Jerry Weintraub's management company and planned his first ever world tour in 1978, Dylan assembled a huge band featuring backing singers, not unlike Presley's band set up during the last decade of his life. Among the musicians Dylan recruited were Steve Douglas, who played saxophone on Dylan's 1963 single, "What Did I Say?" and replacing Rob Stoner, Jerry Sheff on bass, who was in Elvis's touring band. They also played on Street Legal, Dylan's 16th or 17th or 18th album, depending on your criteria. Released 1 week after the Rolling Stones' blockbuster "Some Girls," complete with their au courant nods to punk, disco, and new wave, built-in controversies, and even a couple of digs at Dylan's marital woes, Street Legal's big band sound didn't stand a chance. While Dylan looks uber cool on the front of the album, the back cover showed him almost like an Elvis impersonator, complete in Vegas getup, not unlike the cover of Presley's Not Really Live album from 1976, From Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee, an almost concept album about heartbreak and lost love. Having Street Legal recorded quickly and poorly at Dylan's own rundown studios didn't help matters, although the muddled sound may have helped convey Dylan's state of mind at the time. There was nothing more unhip than playing Vegas in those days. As I mentioned previously, Presley at the time of his death had become a joke to the next generation of music fans. He was following members of the Rat Pack and other artists marginalized by Dylan and his peers, and began playing Vegas residencies in 1969. Las Vegas was the place where singers wanted to cash in their chips and die, at least creatively. But Dylan, Vegas, what inconceivable thing would he do next? Start singing Frank Sinatra songs? Here in the US, playing a Vegas-type show was nothing short of heresy, worthy of a Judas shout-out or two. The rest of the world, however, had missed Tour 74 and the Rolling Thunder Review, and aside from 1969's Isle of Wight concert, had not seen Dylan live for almost 12 years. They were hungry for some Bob, and they ate up his concerts over there, possibly not quite as aware of the unhip Vegas association. Here in the US, however, the knives were out and they had to cut something. There were bad vibes in the air before Dylan even arrived when I saw him at the Boston Garden in 1978. Near the end of the show, Dylan spat out something like, "I hope you know this isn't Vegas or disco, because you know it isn't." Say so, Bob. After being devastatingly disappointed by the first Stones concert I ever saw earlier that summer, I was likewise baffled by Dylan in Boston that fall. I felt like the ideals of the 60s counterculture had been a sham. I knew better than to say the Dylan show was bad, but once again, I just didn't get it. In retrospect, there were both brilliant shows for different reasons, but I just could not see that at the time. One thing you learn from listening to Dylan, that it's best to open your mind to what is and not what you expect. Infinity on trial, indeed. Until I read the second edition of Michael Gray's Song and Dance Man in 1981, I had no idea Street Legal and the 1978 tour received positive reviews outside of the US. Now I was intrigued. I was not yet 20 when Street Legal was released, so how could I possibly relate to what Dylan was going through? It took a couple more years of life experience to even get a glimpse into the turmoil in Dylan's life. However, any Presley connection to me was still somewhat superficial. Only recently had I decided to view Street Legal in its entirety with Elvis-tinted glasses. While I'd say there was much more of an obvious and direct Presley influence on 2001's Love and Theft, which I will address later, I did make a few new observations that I'd like to share with you now. First, a caveat. These are only observations. I'm not saying any of this is what Dylan intended. It's just that I've been obsessed with this album for over 40 years, and I keep going back to it. When I do, I continue to dig up more and more hidden gems. That's why I said the ghost of Elvis in the title. To the best of my knowledge, this particular thread has not been explored in such detail elsewhere. So let's just say you're Bob Dylan. And who hasn't? And while you may come across as modest and self-effacing, you also realize now that Elvis has vacated his throne, you have become America's preeminent artist, so you picture yourself in Presley's shoes. For most of the dates on the 1978 tour, each concert began with his backing band playing an instrumental version of an old Dylan classic, after which Bob would appear and sing an old blues song. Similar to the beginning of Love and Theft, Street Legal begins with the music gradually fading in. Here, I picture Dylan as Elvis, waiting in the wings, going on stage with the band in full swing, already taking care of business. The lyrics come fast and deep, intense and oblique. It is an avalanche of emotions. They are bitter, angry, desperate, passionate. They are full of references to the Bible, Greek mythology, angels, strippers, tarot, magic, astrology, voodoo, guns, euthanasia, and a higher power. And hair. There's quite a few references to hair on this album. And then there is the return of the backing singers, performing here as if they are a Greek chorus, echoing, haunting, and mocking the thoughts swirling in Dylan's troubled mind. This was the revelatory album people thought Blown the Tracks to be. To me, his vocals have never been more honest, and there is at least as much information per square inch here as on any other Dylan album. The opener, Changing of the Guards, clearly has autobiographical data in the coded lyrics, but some could easily relate to Presley stepping into the marketplace, the need to reject organizations, narcissistic mirrors, and the fall of false idols. Was the changing of the guards a reference to the king handing over his crown, and did it come with a warning? Nothing so direct. There's too much going on in the song, but it feels like there might be something in there. Second song, New Pony, a 2-chord blues, actually at one point a 3-chord blues in the outtake versions we got to hear in Tulsa, with its sleazy stripper sax accompaniment, was probably the one that alienated enough people never to be able to fully embrace the rest of the album. On the surface, it was unlike any other in Dylan's catalog, until you take it out of the context of his personal life. Yes, it's bawdy and vulgar. Was it really much different than some of his songs from the Basement Tapes era? Here he sings that his new pony has great big hind legs. He wants to jump on top of her. And since I'm pretty sure Bob was not into bestiality, we can assume the pony is a metaphor for his new female love interest. But cast your mind back to 1967 when Dylan was writing lyrics like, "That big dumb blonde with her wheel gorged," or "Slap that drummer with a pie that smells," or "the very next day with a nose full of pus." Is the new pony really all that different? And what about that shocking opening verse about the pony woman needing to be put down because of her broken leg. After hearing the news of Presley's death, was Dylan sitting around his Minnesota farm playing Presley's second album, one with the song Old Shep. Originally a Red Foley song from the 1930s, Presley sang it dressed as a cowboy in 1945 at the Mississippi, Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, his first public performance. It's a real, corny tearjerker about a boy who had a dog that once saved his life. Now that the doctor says there's nothing more he can do for him, it's the boy's responsibility to pick up his gun and aimed it at Shep's faithful head. Then Elvis sings, "I wish they would shoot me instead." In New Pony, Dylan sings, "I swear it hurt me more than it ever hurt her." And get this, fellow Dylanologists, note the same amount of letters in Old Shep and New Pony. Old Shep, New Pony. Old, new, Shep, pony, dog and pony show, song and dance man. Coincidence? Probably. For the next song, I remember a contemporaneous review of No Time to Think, where the critics said there were too many words. This, of course, brings to mind the famous line in Amadeus, where a Mozart piece was criticized for having too many notes. The song is in fact a dizzying tour de force, as if sung while riding a circus carousel, which brings to mind the 1964 Presley film Roustabout, or possibly his memory of his fabled time working at a circus in Gallup, New Mexico, wherever that story was supposed to have taken place. Side one ends with Baby Stop Crying, and the second side starts with Is Your Love in Vain. Both tracks echo blues legend Robert Johnson. Stop Breaking Down and Love in Vain, respectively. In the latter, Dylan repeats the phrase Love in Vain in Love and Theft's Tweedledee and Tweedledum, which also references both of Presley's record labels, Sun and RCA, when he says his master's voice is calling me. About Baby Stop Crying, Dylan is quoted saying that the man in that song has his hand out and is not afraid of getting it bit, something Presley and Dylan have in common. Is Your Love in Vain echoes the melody of Can't Help Falling in Love with You, a song Dylan recorded and was released, along with A Fool Such as I, against his will on the 1973 Revenge album, Dylan. For the next song, when I first heard Senor, Tales of Yankee Power, I wasn't sure if Dylan was referring to Elvis or Jesus, two men eclipsed in popularity by the Beatles. Was the Gypsy the Vegas Elvis singing American Trilogy, wrapped in a broken flag and wearing gaudy, flashy rings? Is it the same person Dylan wrote about in 1970s Went to See the Gypsy, a song which may or may not be about the time he may or may not have met Presley? Is the marching band in the vacant lot Presley's? Maybe Dylan had been inspired by some other Elvis film or something. I'm running out of time here, and I didn't find much direct Presley influence on the final three songs of the album, besides the obvious theme of heartbreak. Although, as the musicians on the final track, Where Are You Tonight? Journey Through Dark Heat, while it continues to play, you can tell as it all fades out, much like the finale on most of the dates in the 1978 tour, Dylan has left the building. Even in death, Presley continued to have an impact on Dylan's art. Dylan covered songs associated with him, although some remain unreleased, and has referenced Presley in numerous compositions. Of course, Presley covered Dylan songs as well, though some were only released posthumously. Dylan once said the cover he treasured most was Presley's 1966 version of Tomorrow Was a Long Time. It was based on Odetta's recording, and it featured Charlie McCoy not long after a stint playing on Dylan's Nashville sessions for Blonde on Blonde. However, Presley's feelings were not reciprocated. Quote, "My mouth feels like Bob Dylan's been sleeping in it," unquote, was apparently a common Presley phrase at the time. As I previously stated, 2001's Love and Theft is full of Elvis references. Early in his career, Elvis would sing a song originally done by Laverne Baker titled Tweedledee, Tweedledee. And of course, Presley is originally from Tupelo, a city in Mississippi. Dylan mentions a teddy bear in Honest With Me, and he raises a toast to the king in summer days. After recovering from a life-threatening Elvis in 1997, Dylan famously said he thought he was going to meet Elvis. And soon after wrote a blurb for Peter Gorelnik's 1999 book, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley, Careless Love. For the 10th anniversary of Presley's death, Dylan told Us magazine, "When I first heard Elvis's voice, I just knew I wasn't going to work for anybody, and nobody was going to be my boss. He is the deity supreme of rock and roll religion as it exists in today's form. Hearing him for the first time was like busting out of jail, and I think for a long time that freedom to me meant Elvis singing Blue Moon of Kentucky. I thank God for Elvis." And on the final date of his 2009 summer tour, Dylan was playing in Nevada. It was the 32nd anniversary of Presley's death, and he performed a version of Presley's first single for RCA, Heartbreak Hotel. But aside from the music, the most important thing Dylan learned from Presley is what not to do. Both Presley and Dylan were seen as sacred cash cows by their managers and other hangers-on. On some level, Dylan could see that. And when he fell off his motorcycle in July 1966, he used it as an excuse to extract himself from the star-making machinery behind the popular song, as Joni Mitchell once sang. This is when Dylan began taking control of his life and his career. There were times when Presley was able to do this, like for a while in the late 60s and early 70s when he stopped with the silly movies and began making serious records again. But for the most part, he was alone, a prisoner of his own fame, often going through the motions, self-pitying and self-medicating with the occasional glimpses of that Memphis flash in his eyes and this genius in his soul. But it still kind of left a bad taste in your mouth. He moved mountains, he shined shoes, but Eden was burning. It was time for the changing of the guards. Thank you, and thanks to Alan Fraser of Searching for a Gym, and Graham English for some of these images. And a big shout out to Expecting Rains, Carl Eric Anderson out there in Scandinavia for all of his support for all these years. Dylanologists everywhere, and my beautiful editor and sounding board, who prefers to remain masked and anonymous. And as I said earlier, there's something I'd like to clarify, and it was asked of me in the Q&A after my speech. Yes, I did become a huge admirer of Presley's, but due to time constraints, that did not come across in my speech. In order to make my case, I was forced to focus on the negative, although I do stand by my comments. However, I do enjoy all periods of Presley's career, including some of his silly movies. Well, that's it for me. See you next time.